Hello, Metro Augusta. Hello, Georgia. And hello, wherever you are. This is Janice Allen Jackson welcoming you to this episode of the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. Today, our guest is someone who is a noted historian and documentary filmmaker, and he's going to talk about Black history in Southwest Georgia, and not just history, but how that history influences present day politics in Albany and Southwest Georgia. His name is Mr. Clennon Leslie King, and he has a lot to share with us that gives us much to reflect upon about where we have been, where we are right now, and where we're headed in the future. We talk about history, we talk about journalism, and we talk about investigative reporting. We also talk about how that can hold elected bodies accountable, whether it's needed, and what he sees as the future of Southwest Georgia, given its rich history. Thank you so much for being a part of our Local Matters family. And I believe that even if you aren't from Southwest Georgia, you will find this history in this episode, frankly, fascinating. We ask you, of course, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Local Matters Podcast of Georgia. And if you prefer the audio platforms, we are available on SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. This podcast is brought to you as a service of my consulting firm, which is Janice Allen Jackson and Associates. And if you would like to learn more about me or services provided through the firm, please check my website, janiceallenjackson.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Local Matters family. We hope that so far your 2026 has been good to you, and we ask you to do everything possible to make it good for everyone else that you encounter. Local Matters family, today we are joined by Mr. Clennon King. He is somebody that I have known for approximately 30 years. I think we figured out as we were getting prepared for this interview. During my time in Albany, Georgia, I was shaped by a number of forces, and I've mentioned that in previous episodes as well. But one of the things that has been most significant is while I was in the role of assistant city manager and then later city manager in Albany, I had to learn a lot about Albany's past to understand their present. And one of the folks who can help us with that is a son of Albany, and he is Mr. Clennon King. How you doing today, Clennon?
Thank you so much for inviting me, Janice. I really, really appreciate it. I'm flattered that you would have me on. Thank you.
I'm flattered that you would so readily accept my invitation. I know based upon a lot of the work you've done, it has been to educate and edify folks. So we're going to talk about some of that, a lot of that today. We certainly can't cover everything that is inside your noggin, but we're going to cover a good bit of it. First, I want to tell people why I decided to invite Clennon. I am Facebook friends with him, and he posted something recently related to a 5-part series on Albany that was published by ProPublica. I also explained this in one of my previous episodes. I think it was my last episode in 2025. I explained how impactful it was to listen to that 5-part series. And Clennon shared that, and it just brought to mind how much rich history there is and how much we need to be cognizant of, particularly as we go into a year like 2026 when just about everything is on the ballot. So I really want to hear from him. We can talk about a broad range of topics today, but before we get started on those topics, I want Clennon to establish who he is. And I'm going to ask him to go backwards and move forward. Tell us who your grandfather was and some of the more significant contributions he made to Southwest Georgia.
Well, believe it or not, number one, I'm named for my grandfather, whose name was Clennon Washington King. I'm Clennon Leslie King, but Clennon Washington King was a Florida native. He was not from Georgia at all. He was from the county that is at the juncture of Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, where the Flint, the Chattahoochee, and the Apalachicola River merge. Jackson County, some people are familiar with the film The Nickel Boys, or the book The Nickel Boys, where there was a lot of racial violence and in that county. And so my great grandfather, his father, had a run-in with a white doctor in the early turn of the century. We're talking about maybe 1905, 1906, 1907, something like that, where he was a lover of buggies and horses, and he was on his way down a sort of a road. And the expectation, the custom, of course, was that black folk would surrender the way for white people because of Jim Crow laws, white supremacy, what have you. And he refused to do it. And the white doctor, as the story goes, pulled out a bullwhip and struck him. And if my grandfather did not kill him, he beat him within an inch of his life. The bottom line was he had to leave with his wife and his only child, who was my grandfather. And they went 100 miles up the Flint River to this sanctuary city known as Albany, Georgia. And he established himself. There was a sort of a settlement house, if you will, under a fraternity called I think it was the Oddfellows building in the heart of Harlem. And they stayed there for a year before buying property in East Albany on the Flint River, right under that railroad bridge that you oftentimes see that's so iconic. And he lived on Railroad Street with my great grandmother and my grandfather. And my grandfather then eventually he did not want to be a farmer. Obviously, my great grandfather, who was a drayman after he came to Albany, he basically was hauling things. My grandfather went to Tuskegee and paid his way through Tuskegee as a chauffeur for Booker T. Washington. And it is there that he was a student, as a student of agronomy, he was a student of George Washington Carver, but more importantly, also met my grandmother, who was a daughter, probably almost 10 years his junior, of one of the administrators, top administrators, the comptroller. And he would go after he graduated. He paid his way through Tuskegee, graduated, went on to Mississippi, taught there, and then made his way to go marry her. She was at Fisk at this point. And then they made their way, they got married in Milledgeville, the former capital, and then made their way to Albany, where they began having these children. And they had in all 8, 7 remarkable sons. There was a daughter who was the 4th eldest. She died before the age of 2 due to I don't know what it was, malaria, polio, something. And and so she's buried in the graveyard here, the Oakview graveyard. But that's where my grandfather came, and one of the first things he did was that he was really the freedom fighter, the forefront for voting rights. And he established and became president of the Voters League, the Union Voters League. There was a Union League, and he was the first president. And he was the one in the end, right after Dr. King came to the national stage, he was the one who wrote him. There's a letter exists that Stanford has of him writing Dr. King to ask him to come. He, of course, put it off, but 5 years later, he was there. So my grandfather had these 7 remarkable sons. I'll just highlight 3 of them. The eldest, who's named for him, Clennon Washington King Jr., became the 3rd black man in the country to run for president of the United States. So they were watching his voting rights organizing. He was the one who was organizing people getting registered to vote. This is my grandfather. But my uncle, Clennon, he ends up being the third uh, black man in the entire country to run for president behind Frederick Douglass and a guy by the name of George Edwin Taylor, who's actually buried in Jacksonville. Then the next one is my father, who's the first black man to run for Congress since Reconstruction in the entire state. Not Andrew Young, not John Lewis, none of this. It happened here in Albany, and so he was the first black since Reconstruction to run for Congress. That's in '64. 6 years later, in '70, he becomes the first black ever to run for governor. The federal courthouse, as you well know, is named for him. The very first federal courthouse in the former Jim Crow South, named for a black man, is named for my father. And then the other two quickly is my Uncle Slater, who was a builder, real estate, insurance, what have you, and he became the very first black to run for mayor in 1963, the year before my father ran for Congress. And then, of course, you know my Uncle Preston, who, of course, got a presidential pardon stemming from a Jim Crow era draft conviction. So these were the products of Maggie King, my grandmother, whose father was a cabinet maker in Milledgeville and then became a funeral director. And the Slater Funeral Home is still in operation in Milledgeville. And that was her name, and that's where the name Slater comes from. That was her maiden name, and there you
Yeah.
have it.
So that's why you have an uncle named Slater King. Okay, got it, got it. I love it when those family names, people use family names in that way. I have done the same thing. My son's first name is my mother's maiden name, that sort of thing. I like preserving family history in that way. So just for context, I want to throw out some years. You threw out a few, but tell me when your grandfather was active in getting people engaged in voting, give me the time period. What years? We're going from
We're talking about
19
the
what to what?
40s. You're familiar with
1940s.
the book, and I know you probably have it within your library, and you can order it online. It's called Open Dim Cells
Hmm.
by, it's the photography in large part of Benny Frank Cochran,
Hmm.
Jr., the very famous photographer here. Mary Frances Jenkins went and wrote a book after her son took over his photography practice. And there are photographs and she establishes in there that the big fight was getting black folk to register to vote because, again, this was a politically very powerful place, way more powerful than Atlanta. Keep in mind, about 50 miles from you, just bear with me here for a second, 50 miles from Augusta, north, is a county called Wilkes County. The name of the county seat is Washington. And on the heels of the end of the Civil War, black folk packed up 500, left that county, and made a beeline for Dougherty County. And the reason was because, keep in mind, per capita, this place was the wealthiest at one point in the entire state because of it was the buckle of the Black Belt, the Egypt of the Confederacy, and this is where all the cotton was. The cotton is what made America rich. It's what made America an empire. And we were a capital and cornerstone of the Cotton Kingdom. Why? Because we sat on that river and that we were a port city. And so we would take that cotton, all these downtown buildings where you were, city manager, assistant city manager, all of that, those were warehouses. And they would take that cotton, it was a non-perishable, and they would take them, put them on the boats, and they would send them down the Flint River, past Bainbridge, until it met with the Chattahoochee, and then down to Apalachicola, Florida, where it was then boarded on boats, on ships that went around the Florida Peninsula, sometimes making pit stops in in Charleston, New York, Boston, and then making a beeline for Liverpool, England. And of course, 40 miles outside of Liverpool, England, is Manchester, and that was the world capital for textiles. And so we were extremely important. So you got this, what's the most expensive line item in the entire, in any business? It's labor. And
Yeah.
so there you got it. I mean, slavery is so important. So they first needed land. Andrew Jackson solves that problem. Keep in mind now, Eli Whitney comes to Savannah. He's the one who goes ahead and develops the cotton gin.
Yeah.
Then after that, they need land. So he goes ahead and gets the Indian Removal Act, wipes out the Native Americans all up in this area. And then what happens is he marches us from the tobacco, the indigo, and rice fields of of Virginia and the Carolinas to what became the cotton fields of Southwest Georgia and beyond. And so this place is inundated with black folk. And right after the Civil War is over, right after it was done, in the fall of 1865, black folk from your county, from this county I'm telling you about, Wilkes County, they come down here to establish a huge farm. It is a sign of the first political activity here, and they started something called the Equal Rights Association, and they got 500 acres of land. And this colony from Wilkes County, basically, they started, getting registered to vote. All of that here in Dougherty County,
Approximately what year?
huh?
Approximately what year? Did,
This is 1860. I'm telling you, in the fall of 1865
okay.
to maybe 1866, there is a mass move, and it's called the ERA. They call it the Wilkes County Colony, and they move. I don't know if you're familiar with Antioch Road. It's kind of East Albany, sort of out that way, out
Yeah.
19. Yeah, it's out there that they were able to rent because whites would not rent former enslaved Africans land. But what did they specialize in? What did we as a people specialize in? We specialized in farming. And so they needed this land to make a living. They needed this land to get politically active. They armed themselves, all of that. And the Freedmen's Bureau helped them get this land. There was an absentee white landowner who went ahead and leased the land to them. And it was called the Wilkes County Colony. And these were black men. And there were 500 of them. And then that group eventually morphed into what was called the Union League. And the president of the Union League, so that you understand the political connection, was a guy by the name of Philip Joyner. And Philip Joyner is one of the 33, I think, that was tossed out of the Georgia General Assembly. This is connecting, and he was also involved in the Camilla Massacre. The Camilla Massacre. The point of the matter is he was the state representative for Albany and Dougherty County and this region. That's how many black people were here. This is the blackest major city in Georgia, even as we speak. We can't talk about South Fulton because South Fulton, without Atlanta, is not a city. I mean, it's basically a bedroom community. It's a suburb. But when you look at Columbus, when you look at Savannah, when you look at Augusta, when you look at Atlanta, the blackest major city is Albany. And it's a huge concentration, and that's a legacy of slavery. So they start this organization that then turns into basically, it morphs into what was the Republican Party in the end. Because, of course, black folk were with the party of Lincoln. Why? Because, of course, he was the one who, quote unquote, freed us.
The
And
slaves,
so
right.
it morphed from the Equal Rights Association to the Union League, which Philip Joyner was president of. Again, the first black state representative representing Dougherty County in this area. And then from there, it turns into the Republican Party, the Radical Republican Party. And then he gets involved in the Camilla Massacre and what have you. And then we start getting elected. And by the turn of the century, they start shutting it off. How does that happen? It happens through literacy tests. It happens through poll taxes. These are all barriers to this political process that Black folk, who are the majority here, again, Du Bois talks about in his Souls of Black Folk. 2 chapters of the Souls of Black Folk are dedicated to Dougherty County. And there's a reason. I mean, we were 5-1 here. So things haven't really changed. They really haven't. So by the turn of the century, we're no longer voting because of these intimidation practices, what have you. But Albany continues to be a safe haven, a sanctuary. There are all these lynchings around. If you've ever gone to Bryan Stevenson's lynching museum over in Montgomery, they mark and have 2 names for Dougherty County, but they didn't happen in Dougherty County. They actually made a mistake. One is actually down in Mitchell County, in DeWitt, and the other is in Worth County. On the Worth County side, they call it Acre, but Acre, while it is a Dougherty County community, unincorporated, it's actually where the lynching happened was in Worth. This was off limits. Black folk were not having it. And so this political thing, so this goes on for about 40 years where we're not really engaging in the political process unless we have money. And that's where Clennon King Sr. comes in. I mean, he's seen it. He's been enlightened. He's seen Washington. He's worked for Booker T. Washington. He's seen George Washington Carver. He's been exposed. And so he comes back to where his parents are and he fights the good fight. And one of the first suits that my father files in history is that he sues to desegregate the polls here because all Black folk had to go to the Albany Municipal Auditorium. All of them did. And the whites would go elsewhere. And he sued to desegregate that. And thus, it's out of that comes the Albany movement.
Okay, and I want to pause there because you described that your grandparents had these 7 sons who were very politically active. You didn't get into detail on who your father was and his significant role in the history of Southwest Georgia. Please fill folks in so they understand where this lawsuit business comes from.
Okay. So my father, the very first, and I don't know if you know this, but the very first, most of the schools for Black folk came out of churches, needless to say. So even when you look at an Albany State, the church where they had their first classes was actually Union Baptist, which is that church right up on the hill as you cross
next to
Albany
State.
It's right there. And so that's where Joseph Holly has his first classes. Similarly, if you know where my aunts and my grandfathers and grandmothers, the Swank Shop, which was right at Jefferson, Monroe, Mercer, and Whitney, that was the go ahead.
Purchased many a fancy outfit from the Swank Shop. Go right ahead.
You vain woman, you vain woman. How come you're so vain? No, I'm only kidding. But yeah, anyhow, the long and short of it is that was the old Carver Junior High School campus. It was the first Monroe High School campus. That's why they called it Monroe, because it was on Monroe. But it was more importantly, the original campus for Albany Normal School. And Albany Normal School was the first Black school for formerly enslaved Africans. And that's where it was. And on there was a Presbyterian church. There was a teacher's dormitory because the first teachers were whites out of New England, white women out of New England. And then there was the schoolhouse itself. And so my father, as a kid, he would play there and there was a playground and there was this, he tells a story about that he saw this white deputy he kind of grew up with. And he was harassing kids because they were playing on a playground there on that school. It was off hours. And he goes and arrests all these kids. And he says as a child, he was maybe 10 years old, that he was going to be a lawyer to do something about this. He escaped. The other kids did not. And so he ends up, he went to where my father And my grandfather and my grandmother went to Tuskegee. He didn't like it. He goes on to World War II. He's in the Pacific Rim at this point, and then he comes back and he goes to my grandmother's alma mater at Fisk. And he graduates from Fisk with my Uncle Slater, even though my Uncle Slater's 4 years his junior. My Uncle Slater didn't go to World War II. My father did. So they graduate together in 48 or 49. And then from there, he gets into law school at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. It's at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland that he runs into a woman by the name of Carol Johnson, who is my mother. And they marry. And he was just going to hedge his bets a little bit. And he went and sat for the bar in Ohio, just in case. But his intention was always coming back to Albany. And so he came back to Albany. He ends up, it's because of my grandparents and his uncles and his family around him, he was able to do so much. He was the lawyer of record for the Albany movement. And you think about it, that was a revolt. So you had a revolt that happened here. This is the first major campaign after Montgomery, nationwide. And so there was a TV news reporter recently here interviewing me. And she said, how is it that you go from enslaved to suddenly running the government? Because Black folk run the government here. And I said, because she says, generally there has to be some sort of revolution. And I said, yeah, there was a revolution. It was called the Albany Movement. And that's what it was. And so my father, he represented everybody, but he also desegregated school systems. He desegregated and leveled out the playing field regarding equal pay for city employees, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I want to touch on that equal pay because that was one of the things that I one of those pieces of Albany history that I had to learn when I came in. And for folks who don't know how all of this fits, a couple of things I want to ask again because I want to follow a timeline here. Your parents were born in the 1920s, is that about right?
Yeah, my father was born October 12th, 1923. My mother was born October 1st, 1927.
That is so interesting. That means that your father was born 7 days after my father was.
Wow.
My father was born October 6th, 1923.
Oh, wow. That's
So,
amazing.
um, so that too something we have in common. Then I come into Albany in 1993 as an assistant city manager, and at that point, the organization was still under a court-ordered desegregation plan. And one of the issues was compensation for African American employees. And in 1993, I'm 29 years of age. I had come to work in Albany from Maryland. I had been working in Prince George's County, Maryland, in a relatively lower level position. I tell everybody I went from being a little bitty fish in a great big pond to being a big fish in a smaller pond. But I start learning about how Black employees had been treated and how they had to sue the city to get equal wages. And I think that suit took place in the 70s, if I'm not
Yes, that's
mistaken.
correct. Johnny
So
Johnson.
they were still under this order 20 years later when I arrived. It was dropped shortly thereafter, but it was about 20 years that there was a court ordered process for hiring, promotions, compensation, etc. And Johnny Johnson, the employee who was named the first name in the suit, I'm sure there were probably many, but his first name, his son later came to work for the city of Albany in our human resources department.
Wow.
His son, Johnny Purnell Johnson, was our employee relations or organizational development manager. I can't remember. Anyway, we worked very closely together during the time that I was I think he came in after I became city manager. We worked very closely together. So all of this sort of comes full circle. And now the Public Works building is named for Johnny Johnson. But just to let you know, coming in 93 would seem like you wouldn't hear about stuff like that anymore, but you did because it made such a significant impact on the organization. And now, as you get to a point where you Black city manager, Black county administrator. I will note, I don't tell people a whole lot about this, but yeah, I was the first Black city manager in Albany.
Very historic. I mean,
In
really, really, I mean, you're a historic figure for us because, again, we've had many city managers, county managers, what have you, but they stand on your shoulders, Janice. They stand on your shoulders, and we thank you for being that pioneer. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you all for the opportunity. I consider Albany my second home. I lived there for 12 years, so I was there for a long time and really got a chance to become a part of the community. And I appreciate how welcoming everybody was while I was still at the same time trying to do my job, do the best for the residents. And I really cared about the residents, and I think that's something that stays with people is
We
they know,
felt that.
hey, I really cared about the folks who were there. So I walk into this situation where historic segregation, not used to women in positions of leadership, which is a whole other story. We could talk about that another
Well, no,
day.
no, no. Hold on, wait, wait,
But
wait. But let me just say this real quickly, and you can go on with your story. That you were a woman, I think makes all the difference in the world. My view of the world is men think in ones, women think beyond themselves. That's just the nature of it. They think beyond themselves. So your generosity, your spirit, all of that, we were gifted with. So it's very significant that you were a woman. Thank you. Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you. I feel like I was gifted with you all. I mean, I still go back occasionally. I got married there. Both of my children were born there, and I still have deep ties. I was there as recently within the last month or two for a funeral, unfortunately. But I still, it's my place. I'm still there as often as I can get down there. So you've got this rich history. I want to get back to who Clennon is. So now we know about your family members and the key role that your father played. Also, King Phipps Associates. You got to describe what King Phipps Associates was.
Well, one of the things, let me just say this one other thing, and if you go to the federal courthouse, the C.B. King Federal Courthouse or U.S. Courthouse, where Stacey Abrams' sister is the chief judge. One of the things that Herb Phipps, who put together the plaque, points out as well about Dad's contribution is one other thing, and that is that he leveled the playing field where concerns all white juries. He got rid of them. The practice was always all white juries, even though this was a predominantly black, these were predominantly black communities all around here. And so he got rid of that. King Phipps and Associates, uh, Herb Phipps was out of Baker County. And so he grew up watching my father. He was significant as well because he didn't work, his family, though they were farmers, didn't work for white people. He had his own, they all had their own land. And so there was a level of independence. In fact, his forebears really were enslaved initially on the property that Miss Shirley Sherrod has, Resora. That's where they came off of. And eventually they became independent. But the long and short of it is Herb Phipps went to Dad saying that he wanted to be a lawyer after he went to Morehouse. Dad helped him get into Case Western Reserve, his alma mater, which is where he graduated from. And then they established, Dad's dream was always to establish something that would outlast him, a black firm. And there was no black firm. Generally, there were people who were coming in and out of Atlanta or during the summer. And so he created this. This was comprised of Carl Bryant, Henry Williams. There was a guy by the name of Merritt who was also out of the sort of Perry area. That law firm was established at 502 South Monroe Street, right behind where my grandparents had their grocery store and the women's shop, the swank shop. So Herb Phipps and Associates, that was a driving force. Eventually, Attorney Phipps went on to his own practice, became a judge, and of course became chief judge of the appeals court in Atlanta. Very significant. Carl Bryant was just brilliant. Henry, who's still around, my brother, who's still around as well. But yeah, so anyhow.
Somebody else, I think, worked there for a little while. Was Mary Young Company
Yes,
there
yes,
for a
yes,
while? Okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes. She sure was. She was a client of my father's. I think she tried to desegregate the Martin theaters over in Fitzgerald.
Yeah,
And
which is where she was from. That's
which
right.
exactly, she was from Ben Hill County. And so she was a client of my father's. She told him that she wanted to be a lawyer. She, on her own, really gets into Howard and then comes back and practices. Even after that, when my aunt Marion uh, decides to practice law, she initially practices not in my father's firm, but in Mary Young's firm. And so, yeah, there's this sordid history. And again, I don't know if you know, but the very first uh, black female that sits on the United States Supreme Court, her people are out of Dougherty County. They're
Did
out of
not know
Southwest
that.
Georgia. No, I mean, uh, don't take my word for it. I'm telling you, they're out of there. Um, and there's all of these people who were enslaved here. So I'm telling you, and then what they did was they moved to Ben Hill, a block away from where Mary Young grew up. Mary Moss grew up. So this is holy ground. I'm telling you, this is holy ground.
It really is. Nikki Giovanni has roots there as well.
Her mother,
Um,
her
yeah.
mother, where I'm telling you, what is it, Carver Junior High School? Her mother was
Mhm.
born on that block.
Okay.
Denzel Washington, his people, his aunt is buried right down in Camilla, right outside. On February 1st, I'm going to be at an event there. But his aunt is, this is his mother's sister, is buried there. She died at age 12. You got the Isley brothers' mother. A lot of people don't know where, what do you call it? Ray Charles was actually born. He was actually born right off of the Cordeo Highway, right off of 300.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was called I can't remember the name of it. I want to say Sunshine City, but there's a name of it. But the bottom line is that's where his aunt, and his aunt is buried right there in St. Paul's Church, which is right on Sylvester Road. There's a lot of people who are out of here who are really, really important. Speaking of the political piece, two Chicago congressmen, two between 1943 and 1945, there was only one black congressman in the United States. Only one.
Was
And he was
Dawson.
representing Chicago, and he
Dawson
was born
is his
here.
name? Okay. Okay.
Dawson.
Okay.
William Levi Dawson, and then the one who just retired, who is Bobby Rush.
Rush.
Because again, these people are from Albany. This is huge here.
Yeah. So Albany was, and is the hub city of Southwest Georgia. To be clear about that, has a significant history, a proud history, actually, of African Americans doing great things, or going on to great things, and their descendants going on to great things. And people still kind of refer to it as a small town.
Well, you know what? I mean, what people need to remember is this. In the age of television, the very first television station in the state was called Welcome South Brother, and you know it as WSB. The second one in the entire state is WALB. Okay, so we're not just a small place. I mean, keep in mind when Gray came here, he married into money. What you know as Nilo Plantation, it was his family or his in-laws who basically sold that, and he liquidated that, and it was based on that money that he made from the sale of Nilo Plantation that he was able to buy the Albany Herald, able to establish WALB, WLG, the AM and FM, the General Aviation Airport. He, this kind of wealth put us on the map, which is why he was so protective of it. But, I mean, you asked me earlier about myself and my journey. Again, you know that I was born on 830 Lincoln Avenue. I mean, again, initially, by the way, Lincoln Avenue was called Plantation Street. And my grandfather raised hell. And basically, he got the city commission here to change the name to Lincoln in honor of the man who freed us because there were so many black folk on that street. That's how we got Lincoln. But I grew up there, went to public school for a year, then went to St. Teresa's, then went to boarding school in New England at the Putney School, then to Tulane in New Orleans. Thought I was going to be a lawyer, went to law school in England, realized very quickly that was not what I wanted to do, that I really wanted to do journalism. And then I started reporting for the NBC affiliate in Dallas, ABC Atlanta, Fox Miami, NBC ABC Jacksonville, NBC Mobile, WGBH, the flagship PBS station in Boston. I went to grad school where Spike Lee went to film school, NYU, but that's not where I learned my chops. It was in these newsrooms that I learned my chops because I did print as well. And thankfully, I'll say quickly that the Dougherty County Commission, now majority black, got 5 votes to basically commission me to establish a Black Heritage Trail here in Dougherty County, showing what will be more than 100 stops, but 25 of them will be featured with films. So you go to the addresses and you'll watch a film. It'll explain where Ray Charles was. This one will explain where Nikki Giovanni's family was and how they left. Each one to establish it. That way there's no footprint that you got to deal with property owners and all of that. Everything's digital. Everything is right on this thing. And so, so anyhow, I'm very thankful to the county commission for doing that. It'll be called the Clennon L. King Resistance Trail of Southwest Georgia. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
That's what you're doing. And that sounds so fascinating to me. And as I look at your work as a documentary filmmaker, we want to talk about that some, particularly in light of how much trash there is on TV. I mean, stuff that does not edify, does not educate, does not enlighten. It's just junk to keep people occupied and entertained, I guess. Why did you decide to go in the direction of documentary filmmaking, and why should somebody watch some of the documentaries that you put together?
Well, I mean, I gotta pay homage to my mom. I mean, she was at the end of the day at her core, she was an educator. She was really almost obnoxious about making sure that I had, my elocution was good.
Mhm.
And God gave me the gift of gab. There's no question there. And then I had a natural curiosity. And my father always made clear to me this place called Albany in Dougherty County and Southwest Georgia is extremely important. And in a perfect world, you got to bring your goods home. Um, and I felt as though even after I left law, that he gave me the nod about going into journalism, which was important to me. And I got a job with a little weekly newspaper called the Albany Independent that Spencer Lee owned at one point. And that was my first job, but I always felt the encouragement. And my first story was about Johnny Johnson, and it was Black History Month, and that's what I wrote about. And so It's just, you know, it's a God-given gift. I mean, this is a gift I was given by God, and my job, it seems to me, is to share it with the world because I can't take it with me. Ain't gonna be no U-Haul truck behind my coffin. It's not gonna be there, so I might as well give it now. And I'm passionate about our story. And I believe you talk about, why is this thing relevant? For me, there's a lot of violence going on. I think we're at number 25 now in terms of murders here. I
Is that like
believe,
per capita? Is that per capita?
well, I know it's in the city of Albany, I believe.
Okay.
I can't
Yeah.
tell you, but I know that there have
Okay.
been, I just saw a press conference this morning where the police chief said there were 25 murders. And what I've argued to a lot of leaders here is bottom line is these kids don't realize who they are. That is, they don't realize how rich and important. They think of this as just being some bend in the road, some backwater.
Mhm.
And our job, it seems to me, is to show just how important this place is, and by extension, who they are. This is where they're calling home. And, it's kind of like, what inspired me as well when I was in Boston. I mean, even though Boston is thought of as sort of being the home of the American Academy, those folks didn't know where Martin met Coretta. They didn't know where they lived, none of that stuff. And I do think there's something about that builds one's self-esteem, self-worth, uh, all of that by giving you your history, by showing you who you are and whose you are and where you're from. I think that's important. I mean, if you know that because I think a lot of these kids are looking for identity. And I think our identity is tied to just this success story, this place. And, the reality is most adults don't even know the history that I'm telling you. And so we've got to give that to our kids. If there's any legacy I want to leave, it's to make sure that they know this isn't just some small town. No, this ain't.
It's not. You named your company Augustine Monica. Tell me why that's the name of it.
The reason is because there was it's named after a black preacher who was an African bishop who became a fourth century saint, and he's also the namesake of the oldest city in the United States. So St. Augustine is from, as in St. Augustine, Florida, is from the largest African nation on that continent, and that is Algeria. His mother has a city outside of Los Angeles named for her. Her name was Monica. And there's St. Monica, and then there's St. Augustine. Santa Monica in Spanish. So the point of the matter is, I figured that I needed to have a storied name in that way to again teach us our worth. The oldest city is named for a black man out of the largest African nation in this country. And, Santa Monica is where everybody lives in Tony, Los Angeles area, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think we need to tell our story. Again, I just use the name of my company to tell that story.
If somebody wants to watch your films, you sent me a few short but informative. Uh, are they available for mass consumption? How does somebody get a chance to watch some of the documentaries that you put together?
Well, I mean, what you can do is if you go to augustinemonica.com, or you just write me, or if you go to augustinemonica.com, there's no dot in between, augustinemonica.com. If you go there, just email me, and I'll send you links. You can just email me there. There's also a contact place, and you can see all of them. I mean, I have more than 100. But in terms of feature length films, my first film was about, and this is where the name also comes from in part, about the bloodiest campaign of the entire civil rights movement. set it in that, and we're talking about the St. Augustine movement. That's where they leveraged the passage of the Landmark Civil Rights Act of 64, outlawing Jim Crow segregation from coast to coast. The second one was a case that my father did, perhaps the most important to him, where a black man out of New Jersey comes down to Blakely and ends up getting arrested, jailed, tried, and convicted, and sentenced to the electric chair in less than 3 days. And he had to save him. And so that's called Fair Game, surviving a 1960 Georgia lynching. The other one is called Passage at St. Augustine. So both of those I can make available. They're an hour long. And if people want me to, I do talks and that sort of thing. I presented them in Harvard, at Dartmouth, all over this country, University of Texas, all over the country. I do that. I present them. So just write me
Awesome.
or
That's
call
awesome.
me.
Okay. Okay. AugustineMonica.com. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Want to shift gears a little bit, but it's still putting everything together that we've talked about. You spent some time as a journalist. When I met you, that's what you were doing. You were a reporter. One of the short films that you sent me in preparation for this interview was with a gentleman by the name of Demetrius Young, who passed away last year, if I'm not
That's correct.
mistaken.
That's correct.
Uh, Demetrius's mother was Mary Young Cummings, who practiced law with your father and was a client of your father. They were also church members of mine when I lived in Albany. Yes, because I attended the Mount Pilgrim Baptist Church where they were at that time.
Oh,
And and Demetrius talked about how he felt like even though there had been an increase in the number of African Americans who were serving in elected office, he didn't feel like his district in particular, his ward, was benefiting from that number of African Americans who had been in office. And he felt like he needed to run for office in order to truly try to make a difference with some of the real world issues, like how many liquor stores are showing up on every corner in certain neighborhoods. That made me think about something. I wasn't surprised, number one. Number two, it made me think about some things that I often think about as we have transitioned due to folks like your grandfather, your father, your uncles fought so hard for voting rights for African Americans to get rid of poll taxes and all the other craziness. Um, your ancestors fought for that. Our ancestors benefited from it. But now people are looking back like Demetrius was and saying, hey, how much has this really benefited us? What do you say to that question?
I disagreed with him. I mean, and I think
Really?
he saw that, especially with, the COVID thing. All of a sudden, all of these resources are available in some respects, and he turned to the left and turned to the right, and he didn't have a voice. I mean, when you look at and this is to the credit of Commission Chairman, Dougherty County Commission Chairman Lorenzo Hurd, who of course is the pastor of Second Mount Olive. Um, the reality is, he says, look, it's not about any one person. It's about whether or not you have 4 votes. Demetrius didn't have 4 votes at that time. We now do. It's the only reason that they were able to give me the business and commission me to do this trail, because the county had 5 votes and it went along racial lines. And
Yeah.
so, at that time, he didn't have that. But we clearly saw that we were the ones who were getting affected by COVID. We were the ones getting played, and yet we weren't the ones. All of the even top what do you call it, lieutenants, even at Phoebe Putney, none of them were black. None of them were. In fact, I remember meeting with the guy and saying, where are your black people? This community is black. And so, yeah, he said that, but at the time he didn't have that. Now he did see the number go to four, which gave him the majority right before his death. But they're in the difference. That's when we realize, no, we cannot afford to sleep at the wheel. We can't. You know, Miss Shirley Sherrod, she has a saying. There's a book that's by uh, what do you call it? Bernice Johnson Reagan, called "We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest." It's a song. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We just got to keep doing it. We got to keep doing it. It's like maintaining a muscle. And so I think that he thought, Obama and all that. But yeah, I mean, you got to keep it. You got to keep at it. You got to keep working. That's
Got
our
to keep
job.
working. And we have to stay educated and unified in order to make a difference. I think that's where we lose it. In my personal opinion, after having watched a ton of elected bodies in action, I think that's where we lose it. Um, Bernice Johnson Reagan, Sweet Honey in the Rock is the name of the group that she founded, I believe singing group that she founded. Was she also born in Albany?
She was born in Albany. She was born, it's very interesting. She had a cousin. Their family was originally out of Baker County, Calhoun County. So that's where her father, mother kind of were from. They were children of sharecroppers and very poor. And that family had a child who was disabled, and she was a twin. And her other twin was hanging out of her stomach. And so she lived with that, and some circus barker went and approached her mother, and said, "Can we use your daughter as a sideshow?" And it became their ticket in the end to a lot of money. And so she lived until the age of maybe 21, 22 years old. Her stage name was Lily Bell Johnson or something, Williams or something like that. Long story short, they made so much money, they were able to buy what you now know as, that was her real name, Lily Bell. Um, but her stage name was Betty Lou. So you know where Betty's Drive is. Betty's Drive is the subdivision, the farm that her wealth bought. This disabled kid who became a sideshow. She graduated very bright. She graduated from what do you call it? From Monroe High School. This was the first cousin to Bernice Johnson Reagan. And you walk in the world a little bit differently when you own land. And she lived right across the street. The brother and sister, their parents, lived right across the street from each other. And that's where she grew up, in what you know as College Heights on Holly Drive. That's where she was from. And her father, of course, was an itinerant minister. He ultimately ends up at Second Mount Olive, where Hurd was. But where she learned to sing was actually out Cordial Road. And there's a place called Mount Early Baptist Church. And that's where she really learned to sing. So I got to know her. She came to Vermont to visit us at the school at Peggy's invitation. So, but yeah, so brilliant, brilliant,
Okay.
brilliant
I
woman.
just I just want to point that out that some
Yeah,
folks listening may have heard of Bernice Johnson Reagan before and
right.
her connection to Albany. That's great. So as you have been a journalist, we talked some about, what happens in today's politics. Let's tie that back to the ProPublica piece on called Sick in a Hospital Town. I endorsed it a couple of episodes ago. I'm endorsing again. I want everybody to listen to this thing. And thank you so much for posting that on your Facebook page. Um, it was particularly touching for me because I knew the name of just about everybody who was called during that thing. There were only a few names used that I was not familiar with. And it pointed out the need for somebody to have the resources to really dig to see what's happening because there's a lot of stuff on the surface that you may think tells the story, but it really doesn't. There are a lot of people who may misrepresent the story if you ask them questions, but you got to dig. And these folks did 225 interviews or something just insane like that in order to really explain what's happening with what I call the sick care system in Albany. And it's a microcosm for what's happening throughout the country. But they do investigative journalism. Investigative journalism holds folks accountable. Is there enough being done to hold elected bodies accountable now from what you see from your background as a journalist and what you see now as a historian and filmmaker?
I don't view uh, electors, voters as being. Look, I mean, I think there's a mother wit about black folk here, and they know. I mean, for the longest, when I first got back here, uh, 830 Lincoln Avenue, where I grew up, was being represented by a white woman who was like an avid, almost, I think she was almost a Republican. She was really, really, really conservative. And black folks just rose up and decided, hey, this is not going to happen anymore. And I've seen it happen several times. And I think that there's a level of consciousness here. This is not a stupid community by any stretch of the imagination. Even though there are forces that want to sort of influence how black folk are. What I mean by that is, for instance, and this has always been the case, Janice, and that is Albany State. The state and the regions can kind of control that. But I still think that black folks are savvy enough here to say, back off, step off here. And I think it's about us being about the business of holding black folk who look like us, who are in these high places, accountable for doing the right thing. I don't think that this is a community that's ever been necessarily driven by money. I mean, keep in mind, coming out of slavery, it wasn't like money. The reason they came here in large part was because of the freedom and the respect that black folk had. And that's why there were no lynchings here. It just wasn't. And so I don't think that, we just roll over and play dead. I mean, you did touch on something I do want to speak to, and it'll tell you something. Think about the numbers. You talked about the lack of journalism here. Well, granted, the main paper, we don't have a daily anymore.
You don't?
No, the Albany Herald is not a daily. 3 days a week, it does business. The guy who owns it is in like middle Georgia somewhere, like around Perry, Macon, that kind of area. He's up there and he owns a bunch of papers. So we got this very conservative newspaper uh, covering a black town, and ain't no black reporter on it. Now you've got the Southwest Georgian. That's all fine and well, but there's no, real staff there. But where, again, I'm getting back to this black woman leading the charge here, in the same way I genuflected you and your pioneering. When you look at WALB, you've got 13 on-air journalists, of which there are only 3 whites. 13. And all of them are black, with the exception of 1, are black women. And black women ain't foolish. I'm sorry. They just ain't. They just ain't. And so I do feel as though there's some protection there regarding us. And, just like our activism ultimately attracted the eyes of the world here during the Albany movement, I think we're still capable of doing the same thing if we want. There are a lot of bright people here. But I do think that there are some stopgaps, but it's about really us sort of holding each other responsible, understanding this is not a one-man show, that we've got to come together, uh, that you need those 4 votes to do what you need to do. And I think that, I think Hurd, especially where it concerns the county, has established himself as a very respectable leader. Granted, he's number one, a pastor of a church, but number two, I just find him to be very responsible. Without his leadership, without the leadership of people like Gloria Gaines, who's from a very important civil rights family, I wouldn't get this commission. It takes that kind of leadership. It takes that kind of teamwork, partnership. That's what it is. I'm not in the political circles. That's not what I do. That's not my expertise. I do what I do. I do this scholarship piece. I do this journalism piece. The first draft of history is written by journalists. So that's I'm not worried. I mean, keep in mind, there used to be all these white reporters. That's not true anymore. 13, only 3 are white. The sports director is black. The weather person, meteorologist, is black. The main anchor is black. I mean, granted, they're not print, but they ain't foolish either. And a lot of people take cues from WALB. And what I mean by that is, I went and proposed. There was a woman who was 12 years old during the Albany movement who ends up, and I don't know, I sent you the film. I don't know if you saw it, but she basically got dragged to jail during the Albany movement at 12 and was sent down for almost 2 weeks down in Camilla, the jails in Camilla. And I proposed basically, there's a very famous photograph of her getting dragged off that went worldwide regarding the what was going on during the Albany movement here. And she's still alive. And I'm trying to get the main library named for her. Because I just think it's really, important. Now I lost my train of thought. I can't remember what. Anyhow, let me stop. There was some reason. There was a reason I brought that up. Anyhow,
Talk some about the future. We talked a lot about the past. Let's talk some about the future. You're living in Albany right now, right?
I
Coming back home.
live. I live in the old New Albany Hotel.
Okay.
So this was a segregated hotel, and right next
Uh-huh.
door is the county courthouse where my father got his scalp split open by the local sheriff. And across the street is where Dr. King was jailed and all the demonstrators were jailed and all the protests. You see them in all the photographs. So you see this
Mhm.
building. This is where Sidney Poitier could not, when he was shooting his 7th film, he couldn't stay. All the camera crew did, but he had to stay in a dormitory room at Albany State. And this is in 1955, the year that King and Rosa Parks comes to the national stage. They're shooting a film here called um, Farewell. I think it was called Farewell, My Lady, about an African dog, a Senji dog. But they shot here in Albany. This is a very important place. This is where WDPC was housed, on and on.
And is that the water, gas, and light building?
No,
No,
the
it's
Water, Gas,
not.
and Light building, that's the old Gordon Hotel, which is to the
Okay, I knew it
east
was a
at
hotel. Okay,
Washington and Pine. We're at Jackson and Pine.
okay, got
And
it,
this is
got it.
across the street directly from the Municipal Auditorium
Auditorium, got it,
and the, what do you call it? And the old Carnegie Library.
got it, got it. Okay, all right, very good. My office was right down the block from that,
Right.
y'all, guys.
That's right.
You're back in Albany. Albany has lost some in population. I think that population crested around 85,000 or so in the late 80s, maybe right before the Firestone plant closed down. And now we saw some decreases in population after the big flood of 1994. I think current population is 66, 67,000, somewhere in that area. Approximately 73% African American. Is that about
Right.
right? So tell me, do you think the future for Albany is bright? The future of Southwest Georgia, of which Albany is the hub city, the state of Georgia. Tell me if you had a crystal ball, tell me what you're thinking.
Well, my sensibility is that, most people here, they always sort of fall back on something that came out in the 70s, courtesy of James Gray, a marketing firm turned up with the expression that I know you know, called the Good Life City. This was before then. We were the artesian city because we sit on one of the largest uh, aquifers in the world. But the reality is this was more like, historically speaking, like the greed life city, because again, it was based on slavery. This was the greed life city. And so what I think that we've got to do is we owe to the ancestors and to the heirs to tell our history. I believe we have what it takes to make Albany great, in the way that I remember growing up here, because I love this place. And so, yeah, I think that a part of it is we got to tell our story. But any what and this as a municipal manager, any comprehensive development plan that's done, what these guys are looking for is they're looking for stories, some history. They've got to look at that to build up sort of what this place is. And that's a part of the work that I'm doing, to say this is more than Nelson Tift, who was a enslaver. This is more than, Slappy Drive and, Oglethorpe. No, we got to really put, meat on the bone here and really tell our story. No, I think our future is extremely bright. I mean, and I'll give you an example. I think it was in this past summer, early summer, I went over to one of the biggest tourist draws in this state, which is Savannah. And one of the things they boast about is that they're home to the largest the largest single sale of enslaved Africans, the Weeping Time. And it didn't happen there. It happened here. And the Georgia General Assembly just passed some sort of historic district thing last session to help with that. I think Gilliard was the person. The point of the matter is they're voting on doing things to develop tourism there. My point is the largest single sale of enslaved Africans happened here on Pine Avenue at the courthouse on its steps in 1860, January 3rd, 1860. It was a 2-day sale. And in Macon is where the guy who owned the plantation, he died. It's there. So my point to you is we've got our own story. If the Georgia General Assembly is voting on things to support tourism and all that in Savannah, when in fact the history is here, then we've got our own ruby slippers. Our job is to click our heels together. That's what we've got to do. Stop looking at who's going to come here and who's going to invest here. No, let's just go ahead and focus on our stuff, because we got it. We got it.
You got to capitalize on your assets and tell your
There's no
story
reason
effectively.
why, let me just say this to you, Janice. There's no reason why we couldn't get Denzel Washington to come down here and visit the grave of his aunt. There's no reason. That's his family. He talks about it. He's never been down here. We've got to begin to mine what is ours. This is the gold that we have. We don't have to look at anybody else. It's within us. That's our genius. Let's mine that. And so I think it's very bright, extremely bright. And we've got to show our children that it's bright. Anyhow.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you so much. This has been such a wide-ranging and edifying conversation, just like I anticipated that it would be when I reached out to you a few days ago to record this episode. As we prepare to close out, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I've said so much. I just think that, I I don't know. There was one thing I did want to share. There's a guy who I went to visit his grave in Columbus. Great guy. He's a historian, and his name was John Henrik Clark. And John Henrik Clark was he actually was born in Union Springs, Alabama, but he grows up in Columbus, and then he goes on to New York. He was the son of a washerwoman and a what do you call it, a sharecropper, but he goes on to New York to get educated. And between Hunter College, Columbia, and NYU, he becomes this extremely important Black historian. And he wrote something that I thought was really, really important. There were two quotes that I want to share. One reads, "To control a people, you must first control what they think about themselves and how they regard their history and culture. And when your conqueror makes you ashamed of your culture and your history, remember Albany movement failure. When he makes you ashamed of your culture and history, he needs no prison walls or chains to hold you." The last quote I want to share with you, he said, is this: "If you expect the present day school system to give history to you, you are dreaming. This we have to do for ourselves. The Chinese didn't go out into the world and beg people to teach Chinese studies or let them teach Chinese studies. The Japanese didn't do that either. People don't beg other people to restore their history. They do it themselves." And that's what I'm asking people to do. I'll leave it at that.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for being a guest. This has been Clennon King, historian, documentary filmmaker with Augustine Monica. Go learn more about him at augustinemonica.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Janice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is very kind of you. Very generous. Thank you for being such a pioneer as well.
I close with my favorite Bible verse. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." This show is designed to contribute to each of those, giving you the power that comes with knowledge, demonstrating love for your local community, and offering you wisdom for decision making so that you possess a sound mind when it comes to these topics. Please tune in to Local Matters next week as we drop new episodes every Wednesday on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and sometimes YouTube. Thanks so much for being a part of the Local Matters family.